Welcome to the Wing Wag. I'm your host, Jack O'Lind. I'm an instrument-rated pilot and the owner of an aviation company and flight school here in Central Florida.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not guaranteed to be accurate or complete. While we research each topic, we are humans and occasionally make mistakes. For the most up-to-date information on regulations, check out the official Federal Aviation Regulations, also known as the FARs, or consult an aviation attorney. Lastly, the opinions expressed on this podcast are the guest's opinions and are not necessarily the opinions of the host or podcast. Welcome back to the Wing Wag. I hope everyone's 2026 is off to a good start, and I also hope that some of you are planning on getting a pilot's license this year. If so, you may be wondering where to begin. So the very first thing you have to do when you decide to get your pilot's license is decide what flight school you want to go to. Maybe you live in an area that only has one flight school, and your decision is made very easily for you. But in most populated areas, you can find at least a small number of flight schools, at least 2, 3, 4 flight schools that you could possibly pick from. So if you are in that situation where you could pick from multiple flight schools, how do you pick? You'll find that each flight school has its own personality and turns out its own kind of style of students. You might find a school that looks very professional and all the students are wearing like the classic like pilot shirt and they're turning out all airline pilots. And then you might find another school that's just a couple miles away where everybody's flying like small planes, they're flying barefoot or in Crocs or something, and they're turning out like backcountry bush pilots, right? Even though those two students went through the same training, they went through the same like FAA regulations needed to get their PPL, the two flight schools could not be more different, right? So along these lines, when you're choosing a flight school, you first need to decide what type of pilot you would like to be. So you can start by asking yourself questions like, do I plan on flying as a career or flying for fun? If you answered career, there are multiple different careers that involve aviation. Are you planning on being an airline pilot, a corporate pilot, a banner tower, a flight instructor, maybe something more niche, like you want to photograph wildlife in Africa with an airplane? Or maybe you want a job that's not exactly as a pilot, but in an aviation field. Kind of like my job. I work as a data scientist at an aviation company. So flying is not a part of my daily job, but it definitely helps my understanding. Or are you flying completely for fun? Are you flying because you want to do weekend trips with your family? Have you been watching a lot of Trent Palmer on YouTube and do you want to become a backcountry bush pilot? Do you want to go island hopping in the Bahamas in your seaplane? Or maybe your work sends you traveling around the country all the time and you want to be able to fly there on your own terms, not have to go through airport security and all this every single time you fly for work. You can just do it, come back whenever you're done. So there are multiple different reasons why someone might become a pilot. And depending on what you choose as kind of your mission, what kind of pilot you want to be, that can determine how you should approach your training. And so when I ask that question, what kind of pilot do you want to be? You should answer this with something like, I want to be an airline pilot. I want to be a backcountry bush pilot. I want to be a corporate pilot, and so on. And of course, you can choose multiple things. Like if you're interested in becoming a corporate pilot and also the backcountry bush pilot, you can do both. And don't feel like you're now married to this identity. You can change your mind at any point. You could first say that you want to just fly on the weekends for fun. And then as you get further into flight training, you might realize that you actually love this and this could be a career for you and you want to switch from your current career to become an airline pilot. And that's totally fine. It can just help guide you in that initial decision of what type of flight school is going to be the best fit for you. So if you've already looked into some of the flight schools in your area, you might have heard of this distinction in flight schools. There's two main types of flight schools: Part 61 flight schools and Part 141 flight schools. And I want to do a quick side note for a second. In aviation, a lot of times you'll hear people talk about the different parts. So I just mentioned Part 61 and Part 141, but there are many others. Part 135, Part 121, I think is one. And what this is referring to is sections or parts of the Federal Aviation Regulations, or the FARs. And so each part dictates the rules for a certain aspect of aviation. For example, Part 61 dictates the rules for a Part 61 flight school. Likewise, Part 141 dictates the rules for a Part 141 flight school. And before I get into the actual differences between these two, I just want to make it clear that at the end, when a student has gone through a PPL program at either type of school, they're going to have to pass the same check ride, and they are going to receive the same license at the end. So going to one versus the other does not grant you extra permissions or more freedom in your flying. It's just two different structures of school. At the end, they are equivalent, or the outcome of each type of school is equivalent, I should say. So what are the differences? There are many differences between these two types of flight schools, but all of these differences come out of the fact that Part 141 flight schools follow a rigid FAA-approved curriculum, and Part 61 flight schools do not. It all boils down to just that distinction. If you walk into a Part 141 flight school, it may appear more organized, more professional, and all this rigidity in the schedule and the curriculum, in exchange for that, you get slightly reduced hours. I don't remember the exact details here. I think it has to do with your commercial license, but you're able to get one of your licenses in less hours than you would at a Part 61 flight school. So yeah, let's talk about the Part 61 flight school. So there is no FAA-approved curriculum that a Part 61 must follow. And so it is up to basically the CFIs to design the curriculum for the student, or maybe the school will have some rough guidelines. You still have to know all of the things that you need to know for the check ride. You still have to follow what's called the ACS, which just gives a list of topics that you need to know to have your private pilot's license. You still need to know all the same topics, but it's up to the CFI to design the curriculum for the student. And so one side effect of this is you get a more personalized experience, right? If you, maybe you're going into flight training and you know that you want to do a lot of off-airport stuff, grass landings, you can have your instructor teach you that kind of stuff. Assuming that the school allows it, you could do the majority of your landings and takeoffs out of an airstrip, like a grass airstrip. Or if you really love night flying, you could just do a lot of your cross countries at night, not only just the required night flight for the PPL. One side effect of not having to follow such a rigid schedule and curriculum at a Part 61 flight school is that you can learn at your own pace. If there's something you're already very good at, you can kind of go fast through it, get to the next topic, and focus on something else that you're having more issues with. Or if for some reason life gets in the way and you need to take a little bit of a break from flight training, that's not a big deal. You can just work that out with your instructor, take a week to a month, whatever you need to take off. And then when you come back, you might need to redo some stuff, but you and your instructor can work on the things that you're rusty on and then get back into it slowly. Whereas in a Part 141, you shouldn't really take time off. I'm not really sure if you can. Maybe it depends on the school, but it's designed to be more of a continuous learning session, like a college class, really. I also want to say that because of the requirement of having this FAA-approved curriculum, a lot of Part 141 flight schools look very similar. They have a similar feel to them. Whereas at a Part 61 flight school, there's a huge range of different types of flight schools. So yeah, when it comes to Part 61 flight schools, there's a whole range of different types of schools. You may have heard of somebody who grew up in an aviation family. They owned an airplane, the dad was an instructor, and the kid got their pilot's license as soon as they could, just in their personal plane. In that situation, the dad is acting like a Part 61 instructor. So that's considered, I guess, a Part 61 flight school, or that student is training under Part 61. all the way up to they have pretty professional, very large flight schools that appear almost like a Part 141 flight school, but they're not sticking to the exact like rigid curriculum of the Part 141. And so they are still technically Part 61. So there's a huge range of different types of flight schools you'll see under Part 61. Now that we know the difference between the two, we have to ask which is better, right? And I will begin with this. I am definitely biased. I did all of my flight training at Part 61 flight schools. I've never trained at a Part 141 flight school, though I do know a lot of people who have trained at one. And the flight school that I started with my brothers is a Part 61 flight school. And we decided to go that route, not only because it's just easier from a regulatory perspective, but also because we believe that Part 61 is better for the majority of students. Maybe not all, but for the majority. And I don't know, something in my mind seems weird about having a tailwheel-centric flight school that's a Part 141. That seems like a little bit of an oxymoron there. But so I will try to stay fair when comparing the two and talk about under what circumstances Part 141 does make sense. So you might hear, if you're looking into this, you might hear that you can graduate from a Part 141 flight school faster and at a cheaper cost. And I agree with the faster part. Like we mentioned earlier, at the Part 141 flight schools, you're following a rigid schedule and you're not taking any breaks in your learning for the most part. And so the information stays fresh, and yes, you're able to get your PPL faster. But I don't know if I agree that it's cheaper. You could argue that it's cheaper because you're completing the training faster without having to redo as many lessons. And so you could get out in less hours than at a Part 61 flight school, maybe. And if you're going past your PPL through your instrument and your commercial license with that reduced hour count, you could complete your commercial license with probably tens of hours less than with the Part 61. And so, yeah, on paper, it might be cheaper, but from what I've seen in practice, the rental rates at Part 141 flight schools are generally a lot higher than at a smaller Part 61. And that kind of wipes away any gains you would see from the reduced hour count. And so just based on like the students that we've seen who came from Part 141 flight schools and my friends who have gone to them, the people who have trained at Part 61 flight schools generally came out spending less money than at Part 141. So if it's not cheaper, why would you go to a Part 141? So I think that the main type of student who should look at a Part 141 flight school is a very motivated student who wants to be an airline pilot and wants to knock out their license very quickly, and maybe is a university student, right? Because if you're very motivated and you're dedicated to training very fast and you can give a lot of time in this moment to training, maybe it makes sense to knock it all out as fast as you can. And Part 141 flight schools act as a little bit of a pipeline towards the airlines. They push you that route. They teach you airline material, airline tactics and things, even though you're flying smaller planes. So they get you ready for the airlines. Also, a lot of universities that have flight schools have a Part 141 flight school because something about you can count it as college credit if it's a Part 141 but not a Part 61. But besides that very unique group of people, I think that I personally would recommend a Part 61 to most pilots. So if you're not looking to become an airline pilot, I would definitely recommend Part 61, because then you can have your instructor like build a curriculum around your personal interests. If you want to focus on, like I said, if you want to focus on backcountry flying, find an instructor at a Part 61 flight school who's willing to take you to do grass landings and things like this. Even if you want to become an airline pilot, it might make sense to still go to a Part 61 flight school just because you don't want the rigidity of the curriculum. And the reality is, when you go to be hired by an airline. From what I hear, the airlines don't seem to care too much about whether you came from a Part 61 or Part 141 flight school. They just want to see that you have enough hours, you have like a good selection of different airplanes that you've flown in, and that you have nothing like egregious on your record. So like I said, that's my personal opinion that I would recommend Part 61 to the majority of students. But if you're touring flight schools and you decide to go to a Part 141, or maybe that's the only option in your area, that's totally fine. You will do fine. Just be ready to treat it more like a job and less like a hobby for a couple of weeks while you're working on your license. And it will all work out fine. You'll get your PPL, and then you can start focusing on the type of flying that you want to focus on after that. So you've decided which type of flight school you want to go to, and now you have to pick. Maybe there are multiple Part 141s in your city, multiple 61s in your city, and you have to pick which one is the best for you. So the next thing you should do is go visit them. Just go visit. A lot of times flight schools will offer a discovery flight, either for free or for very cheap, where they'll take you up, where an instructor will take you up in one of their airplanes for just 30 minutes or an hour, and just, it's not really a training lesson, they're just kind of showing you what it's like to fly in a small plane. And it's really fun. Like the first time you go up, it feels kind of crazy if you've only flown in like big airliners. So definitely go do the discovery flight, talk to the instructors, tell them your aviation goals, what kind of pilot you would like to be, and see how they can work with that, right? And then also make sure you talk with some of the students, some of the current students that are at the school, or if you know any people who are former students that you could talk to, that would be great. Get their opinions on it. I think actually talking to students is a really good idea now that I'm saying it out loud. Especially, like, this is not foolproof, but when you're walking around the flight school, maybe talking to a few of the students, do the students seem like people you would be friends with personally? Are they your type of person? Or do they seem like completely different from you? Because it could be a sign that a flight school is a good fit or not. Maybe not, but that could be an interesting rule of thumb. Also, of course, check the prices. I've seen wildly different prices across flight schools just here in my city. So pick the one that works with your budget. Go look at the fleet. What kind of planes do they have? Do they look well maintained? Ask the instructors about how they maintain the airplanes. Do they have an on-site maintenance shop? Do they send them away from maintenance? Things like this. Look up online reviews for each flight school. And at the end of the day, just pick the one where you felt the best, where you felt like the most at home and had the most fun during the discovery flight, right? So last thing I'll close with is some possible red flags when you're picking a flight school. So the first red flag that I'll mention is I personally would stay away from flight schools that seem to be focused on bringing in only international flight students. Like maybe if you go to their website, you'll see that it's clearly tailored at non-American citizens. And not that there's anything wrong with non-American citizens getting their pilot's license, but I found in my experience and from reading online, a lot of these like international focused flight schools are more like money-making schemes trying to take advantage of foreigners sending their kids over to get flight training. They'll have airplanes that are not well maintained. They will charge very high rates for them, have not great instruction, and the students, because the students are not US citizens, they don't really know if they have any recourse, so they just go through it and they pay the money and that's it. And so I would not go one of those routes. Now it's okay if you find a flight school that looks like a normal flight school, but then you go there and you see that there are a lot of non-US citizens training there, that's totally fine, right? I'm talking about a particular type of flight school that's kind of designed to take advantage of foreigners, right? Another red flag would be if you go look at the airplanes at the flight school and the airplanes just look bad. Like one thing I will say, a lot of flight schools have very old airplanes, including ours. But you can kind of tell when an airplane is being well taken care of and when it's not. So what you want to look for is rust on the outside of the plane is big, like on the wing struts, the bar that connects the wing to the fuselage. If there's any rust there, if the landing gear's a little rusty, that could be a bad sign. When you ask them about their maintenance, if they don't have on-site maintenance and they don't have like a great answer for a maintenance plan, that could also be a red flag. One thing I will say about that though is if the interior of the plane doesn't look that good, that's kind of fine. I've flown in lots of planes that were very nice, very well maintained, but for one reason or another, they just didn't really, the interior didn't look that great. The instruments worked, but like the plastic was cracking because it was old and the upholstery on the seats was all messed up. But the plane itself was definitely airworthy and like good for flying. And then this is not exactly a red flag, but it's definitely something to look for. I would ask the flight schools for a copy of their like rules, like maybe it's like a pilot's handbook or something. Basically the rules that student pilots must follow. And if it seems a little excessive, if there's a ton of rules restricting like you can only do this like these cross-country routes when you're training, you can only do this, you can't land at this type of airport, and this and that and this and that. A flight school that has that kind of rules can be a little bit annoying. And they might be doing that just for insurance purposes to keep their insurance costs down. But eventually you're there to learn how to fly a plane, right? And if you have so many rules, eventually one of these rules will conflict with something that you want to do to become a better pilot. For example, there was one of the flight schools I was at, I really wanted to practice grass landings because I like the idea of backcountry flying. And I wanted to know, I wanted to at least feel what it's like to do a grass landing. But they had a rule that you just could not do grass landings. It wasn't like, oh, you have to do them with an instructor. It was just no grass landings. And so eventually I just had an instructor take me out and do it. And we just didn't tell anybody. But I was thinking that's kind of stupid. There are hundreds of grass runways just here in Florida, probably thousands in the whole country. And I can't land on any of them according to this flight school's rules. That's a major part of flying for a lot of people. Yes, you have to take like an extra element of caution, but that's something you need to learn how to do if that's something you're going to be planning on doing in the future. So maybe the red flag here is not having like a thick stack of rules, but having rules that conflict with how you want to be as a pilot in the future. So that's my rundown of the differences between the different types of flight schools and how to best choose one. But wherever you end up, make the most out of your training, make sure you communicate with your instructor, and try to have a good time. Even if it's not that fun, try to have a good time. Remember that you're doing something you love, and that once you get your private pilot's license, you'll be free to fly in whatever way you want to fly. And if you all have any other questions about flight training or you want to share a flight training story, definitely let me know in the comments. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to The Wing Wag. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing. And if you're out flying today, make sure to give somebody a wing wag.